Skip it up and that up. I wasn't even going to make an extra video like this, but for some reason the live stream that I did with Liana last night is not showing up on my video feed, and there's a whole bunch of dead air in the beginning, and yeah, I don't know what happened. It was a YouTube bug. But I wanted to make a video that was short and concise and explains what I'm really trying to do. Now, Liana and I started the Rich and Red podcast, which actually started because she wanted to interview me about my opinion on Ashley Judd when I made that video on her and her whole TED Talks. And when we did that video, the chemistry was awesome. It's weird to use that word, but it was true. It wasn't like an interview. It was more so like we were doing a show. We both felt like peers. We both were bouncing off each other. And you guys know that in a few times in the past, I have attempted to do a podcast before. With Mundane Matt, it was mostly scheduling issues that got in the way of that, admittedly. It just didn't, and things happen. Some things just don't click, okay? And I've wanted to do a podcast for years. I mean, after I did it, that interview with Liana, the wheels started turning in my head. Like, man, working with her would be a great podcast, especially because you get a woman's view on things. She has a very neutral, objective perspective. I know that rhymed when it comes to the ultra feminism issues that are going on in gaming and in politics and things like that. And to have a woman's point of view on things, maybe she could keep me in check. I actually said this in the live stream last night too. And she's like a good counterbalance to my opinions on things. And the nice thing too is that we agree on a lot, but we don't see eye to eye on everything. So combining that all together made for a really dynamic dialogue between her and I. And I got a really positive response from my subscribers, which was really good too, because there's a lot of times when I have people on my show that things don't go over that well. So that was a good thing too. So between the fact that that interview was more like a show instead of just her interviewing me, and the fact that you guys really enjoyed it, I'm like, Liana, we should do another episode. So she said, okay, next month we'll do one. That one went very well too, where we talked about Anita Sarkeesian, we talked about the Switch, we talked about Mass Effect Andromeda. And I was like, you know what? We should do a podcast. And I actually approached her about it. And again, this was before all the YouTube drama happened. And yeah, she agreed to it. She thought it was a good idea. And she actually came up with the name, the Rich and Red Podcast, which I personally really liked. A lot of you really like it, but there's also a decent amount of you that don't. But I think the name is going to stick. But one of the ultimate goals I had with this podcast and to see it go forward is that I'm hoping to have zero sponsors for it. I don't want to. I can't guarantee that I won't, but I don't want to because I want us to feel free to talk about whatever we want to talk about. Because even on YouTube now, especially now, and that's why you've noticed that I've mostly stuck with tech minus a couple exceptions. I'm very limited to what I could talk about. I'm limited to, guys know I like to go into political issues, but I've kept them off of YouTube because I know what the ramifications are. And there's many things that I want to discuss and Liana wants to discuss that if we're beholden to sponsors, we either cannot discuss certain things or we risk losing that sponsor. Believe me, that has happened to me before. I have had a sponsor drop me. It's a perfect example. I mentioned this in the now defective live stream from last night, where a sponsor dropped me because they didn't like my views on Anita Sarkeesian and feminism. So anyway, because of what we want to talk about in the podcast, both in the political realm and the technology realm, we decided that we should start some kind of crowdfunding. Okay. But we both realized two things. One, we don't want to do something with 37 tiers because one, we couldn't keep up with them, to be quite honest with you. And two, we felt that a lot of times there are some Patreons that are run very well, but there are a lot of Patreons where a lot of those tiers are bogus garbage. And we didn't want to, one, overpromise, and two, just like dish out garbage to try to get people to spend more money. So what did we decide? What we decided to do is open up a Patreon where there's only one tier, and that tier is $1 a month, and you actually get something for it. And the reason why we did that, and the reason why I'm announcing that we opened a Patreon, is because we want you guys to want to support the show and want to support keeping it free in terms of us being able to speak our minds. So if we only have one tier where it's $1 a month, and you actually get two things for it too, you get access to a full downloadable high quality MP3 of the podcast, and you actually get access to the video format of the podcast. So you're actually getting a decent amount for $1. And with actually only having a $1 tier, and the fact that we don't have a paywall to the actual podcast that will be on Podbean and eventually on iTunes, we want you guys to feel like you want to support the show. Not that you have to, not that you're going to be, everything's going to be behind a paywall and you won't be able to touch anything. We want this to be something where you're like, you know what, Rich, we like what you and Liana are talking about. We enjoy the show. We want to support it so you guys could speak your mind freely. Because you know now, especially on YouTube, that is no longer the case. There are, especially political channels. My channel is okay, but there are political channels that some of them I don't know what they're going to do. I am having a blast putting this podcast together. We just recorded our first official episode today, and I want to see the Rich and Red podcast go to astronomical heights, and that can happen due to your help. And again, I want you to feel like you want to support the show, not that you have to gain access to it. And as much as a small part of me dreaded to have to open up a Patreon, I think due to how we set it up, you guys will look at it in a different light. And I hope that you decide to support it so we could take the show very far in the future and talk about the topics you want us to talk about, not that we're allowed to talk about. This is Richard Review Tech USA signing out. The link to the Patreon is below in the description. Have a good one.